being like, hey, we know that Uta, like, wants to be an idol and everything, but her suppression of singing seems to be making her more depressed and we're very concerned about it. Mahalo and welcome back to You and Idol Precure, episode 43. And let's just go ahead and hop into this episode. We deal with the consequences from last episode of people seeing the Dark Ronda, which I think it's so funny that they're like, there was this Dark Ronda at the venue, it was crazy. I'm like, why do you know what it's called? How would you guys know what it's called? Wouldn't you just say there's a monster? You guys know exactly what monster it is, and it is a powered up monster from the original monster that we had at the beginning of the series. So like, how do you know? How do you guys know what they're called? I mean, I'm figuring that they're kind of just being like, oh, when they had issues at the beginning of the series, you know, less people knew of You and Idol Precure, so it didn't really matter that that stuff was public. I don't know, this is a plot hole that they kind of try to cover, and it's something, I'll say that. The team discusses the fact that they're like, wow, we can't let people know about this. We can't let people know about the monsters we have to deal with. Uta ultimately opts to cheer everybody up by singing, and her loft singing is heard by Mr. President downstairs, you know, everybody's favorite character, who overhears her and immediately wants to sign her to be an official idol, and thus begins part of the conflict of the episode. Uta spends some time being like, how does that work exactly? How do I be an idol as Uta when I'm already an idol as Cure Idol? And she ultimately just brain deads, which this is kind of the tone we're gonna have for the entirety of this episode. I think a lot of people walked into this episode, especially with the way that they had the previews and stuff, thinking this was going to be at least a little bit more of an emotional episode. I mean, it's the episode about Uta not being able to sing, despite her name literally being Song. But this whole episode ends up being a comedic one, which is a choice, in my opinion. Either way, she ultimately opts to say this is her chance to be an idol, and she decides finally that she's going to take that opportunity, which is comparative to how we saw her at the beginning of the series, where she didn't really see herself actually being an idol, but now she seems to be much more on board with the idea of pursuing her dreams. When she goes back home to magically tell the man who's obviously going to be back at the cafe still, because where was he going to go? She decides to tell him that she wants to do it while her family is being coaxed into letting her do it. But in the meantime, Mr. President's like, hey girl, no singing at all. And he immediately makes it clear that what's going to be the bigger thing later down the line is that he wants her to rest her voice so that it doesn't put strain on it, she doesn't lose her voice is a very precious thing. I do want to shout out to them literally, like, stealing this from my household. I had been using this teardrop-shaped humidifier for the past, like, few weeks now, because it gets very dry here in the winter. And it's been great, you know? I highly recommend it. I point it at me at night. I make sure my throat is nice and not dry in the morning. A very comfortable feeling. Humidity is obtained. Like, honestly, these things are really great. I'm just gonna say that, by the way. And it's also cute because they're teardrop shaped. And throughout the rest of Uta's day, we have Mr. President either show up in person or show up in her nightmares, telling her that she can't sing every time she sings. I genuinely, along with a lot of other people, thought there was going to be some, like, physiological reason she couldn't sing, whether she got, like, laryngitis, or there's some kind of emotional block for singing. No, it's, again, it goes the comical route where she's just isn't allowed to, and she's not letting herself, not so much that she physically can't sing, which again, it's a choice. And again, she is suffering the consequences and just kind of like buzzes out. In the meantime, we have the side crew of characters explain that they're very concerned after going to Kaito's concert and seeing a monster. And we get a small shout out to the beginning of the season where they're like, yo, there was a monster that attacked me earlier in the season. That was crazy, and now they're attacking again, and they're getting really nervous and stuff. And Uta wants to cheer them up. To be fair, I don't know if this is a sing and it goes away kind of moment, but she can't do that either, so cheering them up is not working. But hey, for where we can fail with the power of song, we will save the day with the power of being sapphic. Also, don't know why these two weren't transformed before they're at school. Do they just, like, ferry up for lunch break? Like, I would feel like that's such a huge risk. I would just stay in human form the entire time. But whatever. These two are like, oh my god, you guys are so depressed. You know how we fix that? By just being sapphic ladies who will sappically walk you home. And that seemed to, like, that seemed to subdue them for the most part. Like, there really is something about their sapphic energy that is unmatched. And I love that this just comedically is a thing in the series. Like, you think I'm being facetious, but I'm not. All these girls are like, oh my god, the hot upperclassmen are going to take us back home. Oh my god, I'm not worried anymore. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of insane writing. In the meantime, Uta goes back to this beach, which is making me not like this beach, because every time she goes to this beach, it's now the Kaito beach. We love that for us. And who would have thought Kaito's here, because, we gotta do a little trauma dumping, as usual. Kaito also drops some hints that he's, like, aware that she's Idol Precure. He's like, oh my god, Uta, just the person I wanted to talk to. Did you know that Idol Precure helped me out at the concert and I'm super grateful? Like, yeah, Kaito. Real smooth. In the meantime, he decides to come full circle with our trauma dumping, and this time he is going to explain that he was depressed and Uta was the one who saved him all along, because she was always doing these encouraging songs back when he was thinking about giving up. He also talks about, in order to solve his Kazuma problem, that's why he went overseas, and then overseas he found nothing there and it didn't solve his problem. I was like, why did you go overseas? To try to, like, deal with your boyfriend? Like, I'm so confused why that was ever on the docket. Like, man, gays will do anything but go to actual therapy, apparently. Nonetheless, he explains that the reason why he's been overly obsessed with Uta is because seeing her inspiration inspired him to try to reach out to Kazuma, who, by the way, isn't in this episode. I don't understand why he did not make a cameo. I like Kazuma. His name drops twice, kind of, in this show. You have Kaito mention him, and then Chokine is like, oh my god, Jogi was human. We just threw that out there. But no presence? We don't get to see him? Disrespectful to me. Disrespectful to me, who doesn't want these one-on-one Kaito-Uta scenes anymore. But also, I just kind of like Kazuma. I think he's pretty cool. Nonetheless, the Friendship Council is here, being like, hey, we know that Uta, like, wants to be an idol and everything, but her suppression of singing seems to be making her more depressed, and we're very concerned about it. I think it's really cute, too, because they are also talking about the girls being stressed at school and being concerned about them, and Metadon's like, yeah, they were all anxious and whatever, but I think we need to deal with the Uta problem more. And I thought it was cute coming from Metadon. It goes to show you how far she's come from the way she behaved earlier in the series. She genuinely does like the other characters in the series. Mad appreciate that. So everybody goes down to the beach because we knew Uta was going to be there having a sad Kaito moment. Nana ends up having her themed, sort of now this, like, secondary blue cure thing of just being very encouraging and being kind of the lead on saying, you should just be yourself, Uta, we prefer you that way. Do what you want, like, don't hold yourself back, we're here for you, we love you. Yeah, typical, like, speech of encouragement. Uta is moved by everybody's encouragement, brings her to tears, and she might sing anyways. But in the meantime, we go to Chokine, who realizes she's down to her last crystal. I guess there was a finite amount. I don't remember that ever being a concept with villains. We, like, our tools of evil have a finite count. We have numbers? That's crazy. Anyways, Darkine, realizing that she lost Jogi, who was kind of the stronger of the mix, is like, hey, Darkine, this is, like, gonna be your last episode if you can't get it together, girl. Which is, again, kind of crazy how they've handled Chogine in the series. I didn't know if they were gonna hype her up or anything. She's kind of just been there, and in this episode, she's pretty much the same as she always is, which, interesting play. But I'll get to that when we get to that. In the meantime, we get a little backstory for Mr. President. We have the revelation that was hinted earlier. Kokoro was like, that guy was kind of familiar. We get this reveal that he was a screamo singer in his past, and believe it or not, when you scream a lot, it strains your voice, and if you don't take care of it, you could potentially ruin your vocal cords, which happened to this guy. And the reason why he's so hard on Uta is because he vowed to never let that happen to anybody else. We get a strong sad teen backstory, and technically speaking, this is a good lesson. Like, I don't think what this episode is trying to do is bad. But I think very similarly to, like, the focus episode we had for Kokoro, there's it just feels like this is not the right place in the season to be putting this episode. But I'm glad that there's some level of gravity in this episode, because again, it was oddly silly Billy. And maybe it's just because the last 2 seasons prior to this, at this point in the show, these final episodes usually go a lot harder in the emotional department. Like, by the time we hit the 40s, I feel like shows got pretty serious. I'd have to think harder on stuff before, like, Hood Ogadoo Sky and Wonderful. I want to say Delicious Party 2 got a little bit more serious by this point in the show. The fact that this is such a jovial episode altogether, despite it, like, having the teams there to support you, it felt like the conflict just isn't super deep. But it's not, like, a bad episode. It feels misplaced to me. Like, I can tell you right now, by this point in Wonderful Precure, I was bawling my eyes out. And in Hood Ogadoo Sky, it was definitely catching feels that started to roll into the final plot and started to give us backstory. Nonetheless, Mr. President gets turned into the villain of the week, surprise, surprise, and our fight takes place. We knew that the budget got used up last week when it came to animation, so a lot of the animation itself is very stagnant this episode. The overall feel of the animation is very just... It comes off as very novice, I think is the best way to put it. A lot of the movement has some frames to it, but it feels very basic. It doesn't feel like it has those super creative angles that you see with much higher level animators. That being said, the choreography of the fight is actually pretty interesting. This is thankfully not an episode where they all just use their stock footage and we call it a day. They do have the battle be a little bit more interesting than that, which is what I think they should do when we do have the B team come in to animate and we don't have, like, our big players. I much rather see the rest of the season have this attitude in episodes where the fight, again, the choreography is interesting. Having, like, Kiss come in and do an attack, but it was all just so that we could have Wink come in behind her for a big strike, and we see Wink using her shields in a unique way. It's not just a typical shield, she's riding it as a projectile that's going to ram the monster. Like, this is a much more creative way to handle the battles. And I feel like older seasons of Precure, again, even if they're not going all ham in on having the animation be the most amazing thing in the world, I do think the fights were a little bit more creative. And I give it to Wonderful that forced itself to be at least a little bit more creative in the fights because they weren't fights at all and you had to do something in those chase sequences. I feel like for the most part, You and Idol has been very lackluster in terms of our battles. And this one, I do think, is making the best of the situation. We don't have the top animators working on this particular segment, but again, the fight at least is creative. And I think it's worth pointing out that even if the animators just aren't high enough level yet to be doing the most insano-style stunts ever, and we don't have enough time to put in 1,001 frames, I do think we can have better choreography like this. So I do appreciate that they were a little bit more creative and unique here. And even if the shots are terrible when you watch them play, I will say a shot like this looks good. It's a good screenshotable shot. And then the gimmick for our villain, I think, makes more sense. Again, like I said, that I didn't particularly care for the monster of the week for last week in such a pivotal episode. I do think this does precisely what the last episode didn't. Mr. President is a great guy to be the monster of the week, and his attack against the team is shutting them up. He, like, making them not be able to talk fits the exact theme of the episode. He's a character where we, like, have some knowledge of who's being the victim of the week. It makes sense why he was at a dark place enough to get manipulated into being this evil villain. Like, this is such a better setup. And I think it should have been some kind of setup like that, or at least like the same level of energy and thought process should have happened in the last episode instead of Lost Ticket Boy. And there's a part of me that kind of wishes we could just take last episode and this episode and smush them into one solid episode. Because I feel like they really complement each other in terms of like where I think last episode was not great and where this episode is good and vice versa. I think you just have to combine those two things together. And we would have had, I think, an episode I would have enjoyed. Amidst the battle, Uta is so fed up not being able to sing at this point that she's like, girl, I want to do my encouraging song and call it a day. She manages to get past the no singing thing that's been put on her. And she's about to drop the note. She's about to bring it To the point where poor Chokiine, like, again, by this point in the series, the villain usually, like, is desperate and, like, you know, is significantly more evil. Chokiine has not been pushed to her limit the way we've seen with other villains before. Like, she knows that she's screwed if she loses this battle, but she's just kind of afraid. Like, she's never been this big, tough villain compared to, like, honestly, all the generals, which is very interesting on what they might do with her moving forward. But she braces herself because Uta is about to, like, take her out. But Uta just ends up singing. She just ends up doing her normal song. She's not doing her finisher, much to Chokiine's happiness. But sadly for Chokiine, Uta is also still a threat, even if she's not doing her finisher move. But she does pull her little red move and gets what we already know, given the next episode, is the very last ribbon, which shout out to it being blue. We love that for us. But we do have the final ribbon achieved. Very important. Glad we're finally gonna officially hit the end game of this show. We do get one lore drop in here, one unique lore drop in here, which is the discussion that Darkine can see all in, I believe it's Kuriko land, or like essentially where we have Kiraki land, which is, you know, like sparkle, shimmer, happiness land is kind of how that translates. They're like, oh, there's this whole concept of a dark land. I'm not gonna lie, the plot is getting very Hidoguru Sky, and it has only been 2 seasons, so I don't know where we're going with this plot, but it sounds quite familiar to something we did 2 seasons ago. I'm just gonna say that. But, you know, benching the plot for a second, we resolve the episode's conflict, where Uta goes to Mr. President, and she's like, hey, I don't think I can be an idol with you if it means I have to give up my voice. It's too important. He's pretty understanding and, like, talks about how he might have come off a little overprotective. He didn't want her to make the same mistakes he did where he lost his voice, but what really matters, he goes into about he was too worried about her going down the same path as him, which was overdoing it with something he was very passionate about, and then no longer being able to stay in the space. But he reveals to her the most important thing is being happy. And interestingly enough, this episode doesn't address whether this whole potential debuting of Uta is going away or not. They very cheekily don't do anything after that. He just says happiness is important, and then we cut away from him. So I would not be surprised if this is not the last time we see this dude. I'm sure if we have a time skip by the end of the series, Uta is probably going to continue to sign on with this guy, and that's going to be her future. I just, you know, as far as we could tell, we didn't fully remove this from the story. In the meantime, Uta's back to singing, and it's a pretty happily ever after kind of episode. I think the way I felt about this is what I had mentioned before, which is that this episode was kind of a little flat and jovial to me. The conflict didn't really pull me in all that much. Uta, like, all of this was just... Uta's reaction to this was always very silly. The whole episode is a relatively lighthearted episode. They tried to make it a little bit more emotional when the team was trying to tell Uta she could sing, but the conflict and her suffering from it was just, again, so soft. And it made it harder for all the other plots that are happening in this episode that are more serious, like the president talking about, like, him losing his career because he lost his voice, or the fact that Chokiine got, like, murdered in this episode, potentially. It felt like the tone of this episode was, again, a little unfitting for where it is in the series. Kind of similar vibes to how I felt about the Kokodo episode, but I think the Kokodo episode was significantly better. Like, as this being a solo Uta episode, it was okay. I don't think it was terrible, but I don't think it was great. Or I don't think it would be great here. If this was somewhere earlier in the franchise, I feel like I would feel differently about it. In terms of what might potentially happen with Chokiine, I doubt we've seen the last of her. If anything, she's probably going to get super evilified and be turned into some kind of, like, soulless monster or another Dakaranda like the others were, and then we face her. It'll be interesting to see where they position her, because she just didn't have a climactic ending like everybody else, and I'm sure they're going to save that for later. They may end up connecting her to Purirun and Meridon, because again, those guys have not had their final episodes yet, which is another reason why I thought it was kind of interesting that Uta's having this, like, solo episode here. I guess technically speaking she's due for like one last solo episode, but usually the solo episode for the protagonist happens closer to the end of the story, as it had been done for the last 2 seasons, at least. I think even for the last 3 or so seasons. I really have to think back on it. I think Tropical Rouge is the last time I think they did a solo protagonist episode that was a little bit more jovial than serious. Nonetheless, it's okay episode. But we have to talk about the best thing that came from this episode. Darkine! She's looking pretty! I'm not gonna lie, like, whew! Divalicious queen! Also, her eyes in this shot look like they're a little too high. But that's neither here nor there. I'm like, oh my god, she's kind of cute. Like, hello? Hello? Also, again, she's looking a lot like another antagonist character from perhaps 2 seasons ago. And this plotline's looking very similar to 2 seasons ago. Next episode, we're supposed to get details about the secrets of Kiraki Land, so next one sounds like it should be a lore dump. And I'm hoping that it's not too similar to Hiroguru Sky's plotline. I'm hoping that whatever plot twist we get here, which I feel like Darkine is significantly more evil than the Empress was. But, like, the fact that there's this evil land that exists, or, like, at least a dark land that exists maybe as a mirror to the light land, and the implications we have going on there, I'm like, I've seen this before. I've been here before. I played these games before. We'll see what happens. Anyways, let me know how you guys are feeling about the way this season is wrapping thus far. I feel like from what I've seen, a lot of the sentiment I've had is not stuff I've had on my own. I've seen a lot of other people echo how they felt about these last few character episodes. And I'm curious to hear what everybody else is feeling. How are we feeling as we go into the finale? Like, right before we're about to hit the big lore, we're about to get into the lore element of this show. How did we feel about everything prior to getting lore? Let me know. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye!